Look at me. You already know I am not a person. Here is today's story. In the Amazonian rainforest, along a tributary of the Amazon called the Maiki River, lives a community of approximately 400 people. They call themselves the Pirahã. They are not isolated by geography alone. They are isolated by a principle. If I did not see it, and if I do not know the person who saw it, it does not enter our language. In 2005, a linguist named Daniel Everett published a paper claiming that this principle had produced one of the most controversial languages ever studied, a language with no numbers, no color terms, no fixed tense for the distant past, and possibly no recursion, the grammatical embedding that Noam Chomsky had declared the defining feature of human language itself. The field of linguistics split in two. Quick thing before we go further. We're not selling anything here. No ads, no pitch. If this is useful, the support that matters is a like and a subscribe. Because what the Pirahã challenge is not a minor empirical question. It is whether the tools we assumed were universal, counting, naming, embedding one thought inside another, are in fact choices, cultural choices, embedded in a linguistic system that could have been organized differently. This is the Pirahã paradox. In 1977, a young American missionary named Daniel Everett arrived in the Brazilian Amazon. He had a specific purpose. The Wycliffe Bible translators had assigned him to learn the Pirahã language and translate the New Testament. This was not unusual. The organization had translated scripture into hundreds of indigenous languages worldwide, but the Pirahã would prove different. Everett was not unprepared. He held degrees in linguistics and had trained in field methods. He expected difficulty. He did not expect impossibility. The first problem was not grammatical. It was epistemological. When Everett attempted to tell the story of Jesus, an event that occurred 2,000 years ago in a place no Pirahã had visited, witnessed by people long dead, he encountered a form of resistance that no amount of linguistic skill could overcome. The Pirahã were not hostile to the message. They were unable to process the form of the message. A story about someone you never knew, in a place you never went, witnessed by people you never met, did not satisfy their criterion for verbal communication. They asked, "Did you see this Jesus?" Everett, "No." "Then why are you telling us?" Present Everett's missionary identity honestly, without caricature. He was sincere, educated, and genuinely attempting to serve what he believed was a greater good. The Pirahã were not rejecting Christianity specifically. They were rejecting a mode of knowledge transmission that Everett had assumed was universal. The Pirahã language is unrelated to any other known living language. It is a language isolate, a linguistic orphan with no known family. But its isolation is not merely historical. It is structural. Everett claimed that Pirahã lacks features that linguistics had considered universal, present in every human language ever documented. No numbers. There are no words for 1, 2, 3. No counting system. When trading with Brazilians, the Pirahã have been observed using imprecise quantities, about this much. No color terms. There are no words corresponding to red, blue, green. Pirahã speakers describe objects by reference to specific experienced items, like blood, like the river, like unripe fruit. No fixed tense for the distant past. The language distinguishes broadly between now and not now. But there is no grammatical system for placing events at specific points in historical time. And then, the most explosive claim, no recursion. Recursion, in linguistics, is the capacity to embed one clause inside another. The man who caught the fish is my brother. Chomsky and his colleagues had argued that recursion is the defining feature of human language, the property that distinguishes human communication from all animal systems, and the foundation of our capacity for infinite expression from finite means. Everett claimed that Pirahã has no evidence of recursive syntax. Not that the Pirahã are incapable of recursive thought, but that their language, as a cultural system does not employ it. This was not a minor empirical disagreement. If true, it undermined a theoretical edifice that had dominated linguistics for half a century. Everett eventually proposed that these linguistic features were not random deficits. They were the expression of a cultural principle that shaped every aspect of Pirahã life. He called it the immediate experience principle. The principle states that communication should refer only to what the speaker has directly experienced, or what has been reported by someone the listener knows. This principle explains not only the absence of creation myths and historical narratives, it explains the absence of phatic communication. There is no word for hello, no word for thank you, no word for goodbye. When a Pirahã arrives in the village, they might announce, "I have arrived," but often, no one says anything at all. Gratitude is expressed through reciprocal action, not verbal formula. The principle also governs what might be called their theory of knowledge. Dreams are treated as real experiences. The dreamer believes they physically visited the places and encountered the beings in their dreams. But a story about someone else's dream, told third hand, does not qualify. Everett's own life was transformed by this principle. He arrived as a missionary. He left, decades later, an atheist. The Pirahã had not argued him out of his faith. They had simply rendered the foundation of his mission, the authority of an ancient text about events no living person had witnessed, conceptually incommunicable. The missionary had been translated by the people he came to translate. This is the omission we do not name when we say AI. In 2005, Everett published his findings in the journal Current Anthropology. The response was immediate and polarized. Noam Chomsky, whose theory of universal grammar had dominated linguistics since the 1950s, dismissed Everett's claims. Chomsky reportedly called him a charlatan and suggested his data was fabricated. The accusation was extraordinary. Not merely that Everett had made an error, but that he had invented his data to advance his career. In 2009, 3 linguists, Andrew Nevins, David Pisetsky, and Celine Rodriguez, published a detailed rebuttal in the journal Language. They argued that the features Everett claimed were absent could be found in Pirahã if the data were analysed differently. The suffix sai, they suggested, might function as a recursive element. Tonal distinctions, they claimed, might embed clauses in ways Everett had missed. Everett responded, maintaining his position. The debate continues. What is at stake is not merely the description of one small Amazonian language. It is the question of whether human language is a biological endowment, universal, innate, hardwired, or a cultural invention shaped by the specific needs and values of the communities that use it. Chomsky's universal grammar holds that all languages share a common underlying structure determined by human genetics. Everett's position, developed over decades, is that language is a cultural tool. It is invented, transmitted, and shaped by the community that uses it. The Pirahã, on this view, are not missing recursion because they are cognitively limited. They have organized their language around presence and direct evidence because those values dominate their culture. The Pirahã case revives an old debate in philosophy and linguistics, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Does the structure of a language determine or influence the structure of thought? The strong version, linguistic determinism, claims that language constrains what can be thought. The weak version, linguistic relativity, claims that language influences habitual patterns of attention and categorization. Everett does not claim that the Pirahã are incapable of abstraction. He claims that their language, as a cultural system, does not require it. And because it does not require it, abstraction does not become habitual. This has consequences. Without numbers, quantitative comparison becomes difficult. Without fixed tense, historical narrative becomes impossible. Without color terms, categorical perception of color does not develop. But the absence also produces something. The immediate experience principle forces a confrontation with our own assumptions about what knowledge requires. We assume that abstraction is progress, that numbers enable commerce, that history enables identity, that tense enables planning. But the Pirahã have survived for generations without these tools. They do not appear to suffer from their absence. Perhaps some tools solve problems that their absence would prevent from arising. Without history, there is no ancestral trauma to transmit. Without future tense, there is no anxiety about what tomorrow might bring. Without accumulation, there is no property to defend. Everett describes the Pirahã as among the happiest people he has ever encountered. They work approximately 15 to 20 hours per week. They laugh through the night. They show no signs of depression, anxiety, or the psychological distress common in industrialized societies. This is not romanticization. It is an observation that disturbs a particular assumption, that the development of abstract cognitive tools is always beneficial. The film must be careful here. It is easy to romanticize. It is easy to construct the Pirahã as a fantasy of noble simplicity. But the empirical observation remains. A culture organized around immediate experience produces a different psychological profile than one organized around abstraction and temporal extension. Infant mortality is high, disease is present. The rainforest is dangerous, but the forms of distress that characterize modern life, depression, anxiety, existential dread, appear largely absent. The question is not which is better. The question is, what are we missing, and what are they missing? And can either answer be given from outside the other's frame?
One small pause before we continue. If this is worth something to you, a like or a subscribe helps more than you might think, and it costs you nothing. Thank you for being here. Now, back to it.
The Pirahã have survived for generations by resisting external influence. They have refused conversion, refused integration, refused the tools of the surrounding Brazilian society. But the 21st century has arrived on the Macy River. The Brazilian government has established schools in Pirahã territory. Children are learning Portuguese and mathematics. They are learning to count. They are learning historical narratives. They are learning abstraction. Linguists who have returned to Pirahã territory report that younger speakers are beginning to use Portuguese loanwords for numbers and colours. The immediate experience principle is being supplemented, perhaps gradually replaced, by the conceptual tools of the surrounding culture. This is not necessarily tragedy, it is change. But it raises a question that anthropology has confronted repeatedly. Who decides what is lost and what is gained? The Pirahã did not choose to be studied. They did not choose to become the empirical test case for universal grammar. They organized their language around their own values. And now those values are being supplemented by the values of a society that assumes counting is inevitable and history is necessary. Everett himself has been criticized from multiple directions, from Chomskyans for allegedly fabricating data, from indigenous rights advocates for exposing the Pirahã to academic and media attention, from other anthropologists for interpreting a culture through the lens of his own intellectual transformation, from missionary to atheist, from universalist to relativist. The criticism is not without merit. Everett was, for many years, the only academic who spoke Pirahã fluently. Much of what the world knows about them passes through his description. That is a tremendous epistemological responsibility, and it is one that the film must acknowledge. The power asymmetry is real. A white American linguist interpreting an indigenous Amazonian community for a global academic audience. The Pirahã do not publish papers. They do not attend conferences. They do not shape the narrative about themselves. Their difference is intellectual and cultural, not primitive. But the lens through which we see it belongs to someone else. Can anthropology observe without transforming what it observes? Can a description be faithful when the described cannot contest it? These are not questions with clean answers, but they are questions the film must hold open. We began with a sentence that could not be translated. We end with a question that cannot be answered. Does the Pirahã language lack recursion? The debate continues. Does the immediate experience principle explain its structure? Everett believes so. Others disagree. Are the Pirahã happier because they live in the present, or have
If
we...
this way of seeing is worth keeping, if naming what the coverage leaves out is work you value, then consider subscribing. It helps these omissions stay visible, and it costs you nothing. Either way, thank you for looking with me. You are welcome here.